Thank you so much, Mr. Amrani, Yosef Amrani, for joining us here at Euractiv. You are the third highest ranking person at the Israeli Foreign Ministry. You're the political director, and you've also served as ambassador in Greece, Croatia, and I think most recently in Hungary.
As well, yeah.
And now you're on a flying visit to Brussels, meeting European politicians and top civil servants for the last day or so, including today. Thank you for dropping by to Euractiv. I wanted to start off by asking about the situation in Gaza, where the ceasefire, the very tentative ceasefire, seems to be breaking at the moment. There's been Israeli strikes in multiple parts of Gaza overnight. A lot of people dead, according to the reports that I was reading in the international press. Do you think, could you tell us a bit about what's behind these actions by the IDF, and do you think that this ceasefire, will hold? I mean, it's been broken multiple times now.
We hope that the ceasefire will hold. We are doing everything possible to make sure that the ceasefire works, and the ceasefire is only the first phase in President Trump's plan for Gaza. For us, agreeing or accepting the ceasefire is aimed at reaching our goals, which means making Gaza safe for Gazans and for Israelis, ensuring that the experience of October 7th will not return. People need to understand that we have no desires for Gaza. We have no desire in controlling Gaza or staying in Gaza, but we would like to see Gaza as a safe place for the people living there, for us, and also for the region. Now, we have to think and realize what Hamas has in mind. And what Hamas has in mind is not necessarily what we have in mind. Hamas had to accept this ceasefire agreement not because they want to ceasefire, because they realized that the Israeli military pressure is a little bit too much for them to bear anymore, and because their international patrons, namely Qatar and Turkey, put enough pressure on them finally, after 2 years, to agree to a ceasefire. But the agreement, or the plan, which was endorsed by so many leaders around the world and called as a peace plan, aims at demilitarizing Gaza, disarming Hamas, de-radicalizing Gaza and the people there, and turning Gaza into something different, which is what Israel has in mind, which is what many countries in the region understand that it's also their strategic interest. No one in the immediate vicinity, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Gulf countries, maybe besides Qatar, would like to see Gaza as a source of radicalism or a base for Islamic Brothers. But this is not necessarily the interest of Hamas.
And Hamas has been strengthening itself since the partial withdrawal of the Israeli Defense Forces. We've seen images on social media as well of the executions that Hamas is carrying out against other groups, other armed groups Palestinian armed groups in Gaza. So in some ways, you could say this ceasefire, which, as you say, aims eventually to lead to the demilitarization of Hamas, is going in the opposite direction.
You make my point, and that's why we took action yesterday, because ceasefire cannot be one-sided. Israel cannot cease fire and then expose itself to terrorist attacks by Hamas, even if it's called by armed people as if they are not Hamas. Hamas has control of Gaza. Hamas keeps the control of Gaza. The major part of Trump plan, the second phase, is making sure that there will be a substitution, a replacement for Hamas, another body which will emerge and take control. Right now, we are not there. We are on the first stage of the ceasefire. Let's remember that Hamas has not kept its word. They were supposed to return 48 hostages, 20 of them alive, 28 dead hostages. We are still waiting for 13th. They keep playing with the people, with emotions, with the remains. They return remains of someone they returned before. And now the rumor or the news coming from Hamas is that there are 2 more that they are expected to return. They were supposed to do it by the timetable long ago. They have not done it. So the pressure should be kept on Hamas. And there are different ways to exert pressure. There is the political pressure. And here Turkey and Qatar can play a major role. And there is the military pressure, which Israel, if it's forced into taking action, Israel will take action. Because first of all, we have to defend ourselves. We have to defend our soldiers, and we are not going to expose our soldiers as ducks for Hamas shooting. This will not happen, and the international community, the world, needs to understand what we are facing. We are facing an organization which is a terror organization, an ideology which aims at the destruction of the state of Israel. They have not changed the ideology. They are still an enemy, and we have to deal with this enemy.
If and when all those 13 bodies are finally released by Hamas, I mean, will Israel start carpet bombing the Gaza Strip again? Or how will you demilitarize, how will you contribute to the Trump plan to demilitarize Hamas?
This is part of negotiations. This is part of American mediation. The Americans, as you know, are very involved in the process. They have taken over the Gaza crisis and the Gaza issue, and they have a clear idea of how to operate. They are working now on recruiting different countries to a military law and order, I would call it, operation in Gaza. The forces which will be responsible for disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. And then it will be accompanied by other processes, the political process, who is going to run Gaza, how long it will take till you have a body emerging in Gaza to take control of people's lives there, and other aspect of life in Gaza.
That's much further, right? The first
It's
stage...
not much further, it's the next step. The first phase is the return of hostages, which has not been completed yet. And some people doubt, maybe for a reason, maybe because of experience, doubt Hamas' credibility, sincerity, willingness to move ahead. Hamas may not have an interest in reaching the second phase, which means disarmament and de-radicalization, demilitarization. They may keep the issue alive, the issue of hostages alive, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bodies, because during that time they regroup, rearm, refinance themselves, and build power. Hamas rules by fear and terror. Terror not only against Israelis, terror against Palestinians in Gaza. And in Gaza, most people need to have an alternative to Hamas. And as long as the alternative is not there, Hamas is in power.
How workable is this idea of a sort of international stabilization force or an international kind of combined army that would go into Gaza to just disarm Hamas by force?
It's complicated. What we have at the moment is a skeleton idea. We need to beef it up and have more details discussed, negotiated. The positive aspect is that the Americans are committed, that the Americans keep their finger on the pulse to ensure the success of the process. They keep pressuring different countries to cooperate in their efforts. There is a kind of understanding among all the key players except Hamas that something needs to be done. So as long as you have American interest, this is a good positive development because it means pressure on different protagonists who may jeopardize the process. The other aspect which is good is the willingness of moderate Arab countries to engage, Arab and Muslim countries, to engage and take care. We know of an Indonesian willingness to deploy forces. We know of some of the Gulf countries willing to take responsibility. But for them to take responsibility, they need to know that the process is heading in a clear direction and that their people will be secure. And in that regard, disarming Hamas is becoming the issue and how it's going to be done.
Talking about keeping American, support on board, we had J.D. Vance in Israel recently. I mean, there was also this vote in the Knesset a week ago. I know it didn't have a tangible legal, effect, but there was a vote by MKs to, annex the West Bank, narrowly passed, and that was immediately Netanyahu.
On the first preliminary call, there are three more.
Right. But there will be more votes. I mean, could this, maybe not in a legalistic sense. I'm not suggesting that Israel's about to annex the West Bank, and Netanyahu has made very clear that he was opposed to that to that vote, the result of it. But could this be something which will now damage the relationship, going forward in the next few weeks and months, the trust between the U.S. administration and Israel?
You have to remember the background. And the preliminary vote in Knesset, in the parliament, in the Israeli parliament, was initiated by the opposition. Opposition, by nature and by name, is committed to challenge the government and to complement the work of the government. The preliminary vote passed. There is a need for 3 more votes, and it needs to go through parliamentarian committees. And over there, the coalition can ensure that the legislation will not come to a third call. And I think that it is clear where the Prime Minister is and where the Israeli interest is. I would go even further and say that if we have another government, or if the opposition comes to power, I doubt if they would promote such legislation. We have our history and roots in Judea and Samaria, but we also recognize realities, and we also know what is possible and not possible. And this is not something which is in the cards anytime soon, regardless of our strong bond to where our nation was born. So I don't think it will complicate. If people are looking for excuses or reasons or justification to take negative actions, this can be an excuse for them, but let's not forget it's an excuse. And you live in a democracy. Israel is a democracy. Most of the countries in the region are not democratic, and for them legislation is not an issue. It's a political maneuver, nothing more than that. And it should not be taken as a threat to any process if you are interested in the process. And I think that the Israeli interest now is in giving this plan, the President 20 points plan, a chance.
There were also some offensive comments made by the extreme right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, about Saudi Arabia. I mean, just to broaden the conversation a bit and talk about the Abraham Accords and whether is that back on the table? And do you think that comments like that from Smotrich have also, we saw that Netanyahu kind of explosively rejected those comments. Has that disrupted any sort of hope towards establishing ties with Saudi Arabia?
Mr. Smotrich is a senior member of the governing coalition. He is the Minister of Finance. He sets policies on economic and financial issues, responsibility for political affairs, national security, though he's a member of the cabinet, the security cabinet, are decided by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister speaks for the country. And as you know, Mr. Smotrich, after the Prime Minister reacted, clarified and regretted his comments. Saudi Arabia is an important player in the region. Saudi Arabia is a significant force within the Arab and Muslim world. And we are hoping that Saudi will play a constructive role in the day after in Gaza and in the day after in the region. We have an opening for realignment of realignment and a new order in the region. This is relevant for Lebanon. This is relevant for Syria. We can expand the peace cycle, the Abraham Accords, and having Saudi Arabia join the process will be significant motivation for others. As you know, the American administration, the Trump administration, which initiated the Abraham Accords, is committed and working on it. I'm not sure that the time is ripe now, but when we get to the second phase in Gaza and we see things in progress, I think you may see a kind of new openings in expanding peace accords. In that regard, I would also mention Indonesia. Indonesia is willing to contribute forces, to deploy people, and to be involved in the reconstruction of Gaza. And the speech of the Indonesian president in the UN General Assembly last September is significant indication where they are heading. So I'm quite optimistic, but things are fragile, sensitive, and they require statesmanship, cautiousness, and patience.
Do you think that the expansion of the Abraham Accords to include the Saudis is on the table, even without a change in policy on the two-state solution, which is something which the European Union promotes? Macron, the French president, has obviously been making a huge diplomatic play for that on the international scene, and the European Commission outside the window here is repeatedly, stating that that is kind of, its number one policy when it comes to the Middle East. So do you think that Israel could make a deal with Saudi Arabia without, would Saudi Arabia accept a deal which didn't include a state of Palestine?
The question of a Palestinian state is a question of ripeness in a political process and capabilities to have a state. You use the word play, and the French president had the show of recognizing a Palestinian state, but I hope that some French people and journalists will ask the president to what avail, what came out of the show or the play, and in what way it served the cause of peace, stability in the region. I would mention again that some other acts of the French government complicated negotiations with Hamas at the time, and this is not me saying that, that's the Americans who may know a little bit more than the French president and the French government on where we are heading.
Including
it would be very important for international players, presumptuous international players, and I refer to European players, to be more knowledgeable, to be more careful in statement and in actions. This is not just European public opinion consumption. This is a fragile region paying the price of European colonialism of 100 years ago, and those days are over. And last recommendation or last advice to European leaders and policy makers is to listen more carefully to the message and the actions of Arab responsible players on the Palestinian issue. Once they listen carefully to the Arabs, to Saudi, and ask themselves whether the Saudis trust a Palestinian state, besides public announcement, there is a process which is necessary. And we cannot expedite the process just because someone wants to leave a legacy or to have another conference. Paris is a beautiful city. I don't know why they need so many conferences and in what way it helps their claim to fame on the international arena.
There's been a debate after the Trump peace plan was signed, and even before, about to what extent the Europeans, the European Union, but also just European countries such as the UK, contributed to this plan. Would this plan have taken place without, regardless of what France and the UK were doing diplomatically?
I heard the French foreign minister taking credit for the Trump plan, and I would like to dare and say that I don't think he or the French government or any other government were involved in shaping and formulating the plan. They were not in the closed rooms. They may have been briefed, but they have not been taken as active players. Let's remember the picture for Sharm el-Sheikh. It speaks volumes on who runs the show and who is at the backstage.
Well, there were lots of Europeans there. Pedro Sanchez, Macron,
but
Merz,
where were they?
Meloni.
Where were they? And they were decoration on a picture, which is an important message. But after all, I'm not sure they were involved in the process itself. And I'll go and say even further, the American position on the recognition has been clear. The Americans spoke for themselves on the question of recognition. The message from Washington to Stromer, Prime Minister Stromer, or President Macron was very clear on this issue. I don't think it played any role. And again, a Palestinian state will come to life only as a result of negotiations with Israel. And it requires Israel. And when you ask about the European role, Europe has to understand that statesmen are good for public consumption. Statesmen may not really pave the way for any political process. And once Europe understands that besides FAC conclusions, EU Council conclusions drafted by this or other bureaucrats and reached in kind of a last-minute consensus, Europe can play a role by understanding the realities on the ground, what is at stake, and not interfere where there is no need to interfere.
We've had ministers, for example, the diaspora minister, like Minister Shikli, coming to Europe and making alliances with certain far-right parties in Spain, for example, Vox and Marine Le Pen's party, the National Rally. So from the European leaders' point of view, as they're fighting back against this populist wave, they might feel undermined by the Israeli government coming and kind of showing who their real friends are in Europe. How would you respond to that?
We'd like the political spectrum in Europe to be friendly to Israel. The reality of the last 2 years proved that certain emotions, certain feelings, certain bias exist quite negatively. And you mentioned our relations with Vox in Spain. But you didn't mention that the policies of Prime Minister Sanchez are influenced by a minor junior coalition partner in his government, Somar, and they are forcing him into taking actions quite negatively. He may have been in Sharm el-Sheikh, but you should ask what role did he play with embargo on Israel, with joining the South African suit against Israel in the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and other statesmen positions, genocides, terrorist state, and whatever statement coming from his government. We were making efforts to keep relations with Spain. As an example, I give you Spain as an example. But we did not find much willingness on his side. And then you have Vox and PP in Spain, two parties who are quite friendly to Israel and speaking in our defense. Certain parties may have a past, but they have a very different presence, and they are committed to friendship and supporting Israel, and they negate on past history experiences. They may play a role in their country's politics, and they are legitimate. They are members of the European Parliament. So why can they be part of European Parliament and not friends of Israel? And you are speaking about this minister or another meeting Marine Le Pen and others. Just follow who President Macron is meeting and who is he inviting to the Elysee from Israel. So you ask yourself, why is it legitimate for the French political system and other European countries to interfere in Israeli politics, to endorse causes, to give financial support? And it will not be fair for Israeli politicians to build bridges and partnership and friendship with European politicians. You have not delegitimated them in Europe. So as long as they are legitimate in Europe, they should be legitimate in Israel, or with Israel in that regard.
Continuing on the vein of European-Israel relations, specifically about the European Union, I mean, a couple of the commissioners, the 27 commissioners in the last few weeks have made certain comments. Hajj al-Habib, the commissioner from Belgium, recently doubted Netanyahu's interest in keeping a ceasefire. And of course, the Spanish commissioner, Teresa Ribera, accused Israel of genocide multiple times, actually. To what extent does that play into the relationship between the EU, which is already threatening sanctions, obviously, on Israel, and the Israeli government? Is it basically broken now, thanks to those comments?
I don't think that the relations are broken. We certainly don't have an interest in breaking the relationship. But the interest in having good relations should be mutual. And I think this is the responsibility of the College of Commissioners and the President of the Commission and other authorities in the European Union to speak up. Maybe it's time to speak beyond domestic politics and show moral clarity and political leadership in standing up to Ms. Rivera or Ms. Lahbib. A comment about Ms. Lahbib. She was speaking about genocide, and quoting, maybe she doesn't know the details or the background, a biased report by the Human Rights Council in Geneva, a very political oriented organization controlled by countries I'm not sure she would like to be friendly with. A report which is proven to be biased and not factual. So she's quoting that, and at the same time she wants to come and visit Israel. So the European Union should realize that Israel is a player and a partner, and it should be treated fairly. And if it's treated unfairly, you cannot expect to play a role as you treat while treating us this way. And I'm saying it in a very polite manner, in a very moderate manner. The EU would have to do its homework and make decisions. If you would like to play a role, you need to take Israel as a partner seriously and with respect, and not project Spanish or Belgian politics into the process of our relationship.
So she wants to come to Israel, presumably to do something in terms of her portfolio, increasing the amount of humanitarian aid going into Gaza. You're saying she's not allowed in?
I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying if you want to be a player, you have to be honest and you have to avoid being biased.
And the sanctions, the last time the foreign affairs ministers met last week, last Monday in Luxembourg, this was the sort of elephant in the room about what would happen with these sanctions. Obviously, it would affect the Horizon Europe cooperation. It would also affect the trade relationship. That's probably the biggest one. There would be sanctions on particular Israeli ministers. But Labib and foreign ministers, some of the foreign ministers argue that they want to keep the sanctions kind of on the table, so to speak, to act as leverage over Israel. And Labib, for example, was saying that the Americans have massive leverage over Israel. That's how they managed to get the peace deal. So we need our leverage, and this is our leverage. I mean, to what extent do you feel under pressure from the threat of those sanctions?
We realize that the European debate is mostly a result of public opinion pressures and domestic politics. And our reading of the last Council discussion is quite the same as yours. There are different camps, different points of view. You mentioned one, but there are those who ask to remove the issue from the table and engage in dialogue with Israel. And I can give you the list of countries. And it is a significant list of countries, and we are proud of their friendship and bilateral relations. Ms. Lachbiv has been foreign minister of Belgium, so I believe that she has an understanding in diplomacy. But maybe she is a little bit confused. The EU is not the United States of America. And I'm not sure that the United States, in dealing with Israel, is using the term pressure. And I would advise Ms. Lachbiv and her advisors not to use this terminology with Israel. If she wants the EU to be a player, if she wants her commission to be a player, I think it's counterproductive to think that by having pressure on Israel, she would reach any concrete results. And I think that if you respect a partner, you discuss and negotiate with the partner. You don't pressure, you don't threaten. And as long as sanctions are on the table, and as long as the language is one of threatening Israel with leverages, pressure, and so forth, and I would repeat, we know that this is the result of domestic politics within the college and within the countries. If you want to play a role, you have to change ways with us. You cannot use this language with a sovereign country, and you are not the United States of America.
But is she right, and are other people right, in saying that the amount of humanitarian aid that needs to go into Gaza is still not high enough?
No, she's not right. And basically, Europe fell into Hamas tactic of using the humanitarian situation, which they sabotaged, manipulated, and abused, as a political tool. Hamas, from the beginning, used certain political public opinion messaging to win the war their way. once you see the pictures in Gaza, you know for clear that starvation was not the case. Because if there were starvation in Gaza, I'm sure that people would not look that way. And right now we have more than 600 trucks going a day since the ceasefire started. Before, the European demand was, let's have 400 to 600 trucks a day. Now we have 600 trucks a day, and they ask for more. There will be more once Hamas meets its obligations and commitment. You need to know that Hamas is benefiting from the humanitarian aid because they hijack it. They steal it and then they sell it. And the way Hamas survived the last 2 years is through economic aid, because they take it, they sell it to the people in need. They don't give it to people. They get it for free and then they sell it.
Can I pick up on the point you made about domestic pressure and its influence on European politics? Because it sounds a bit like you're saying that the policies are, shouldn't really be motivated by domestic pressure. They should be motivated by,
I'm a professional. I believe that you need to have your policy by interest and not necessarily by domestic political interest, but by strategic interest.
But nevertheless, the domestic criticism of Israel in many countries in Europe is becoming, has reached, never before seen levels. Mass protests on the streets, and that is also translating in some cases into anti-Semitism. So Europe's Jews feel extremely vulnerable at the moment, partly because of these massive protests. There's also been terror attacks, as we saw in Manchester, for example. So, as you're in Europe, I mean, what are you picking up about that? Are you meeting Jewish communities? Are you concerned about that, about the Jews of the diaspora? And how they are, having a knock-on effect from the events in the Middle East through no fault of their own.
You said it's being translated into anti-Semitism. Maybe it originates with anti-Semitism. It's something that Europe, with a very short memory in history, should reflect on. How difficult it was for the European Council in its last conclusions to have a reference to the need to fight anti-Semitism. How come it is so easy for Europe to preach, especially Israel? Not Turkey on human rights and freedoms, not any other country in the region and beyond for violation of human rights. Israel is an easy pick. Why? You should ask yourself, why is this obsession in the UN with Israel, not with other conflicts? You should ask yourself, how come the European Union devotes so much time to this conflict? Maybe because we are close by. I'm being told that because we share the same culture. I have been told that we are loved by Europe and you see us as family. That's why you are preaching to us. But you're not preaching to others. I would not use the word anti-Semitism because it's an easy excuse for you, and I think it may be beyond that. Yeah, we are concerned about Jewish life in Europe. And we see the pouring of sentiments in Manchester and the different statesmen. But what is really being done? And where was the British leadership and other leadership in other European countries in standing up against those calls and slogans and telling the people this is wrong? What is the role of leadership in 2025, close to 2026? Going with the flow or standing up with clear moral voice? So we had this outpouring of solidarity on October 7th. How long did it last? And why did it last for so short? And how would anyone in this continent react if, let's imagine, there will be such a massacre in any European city, coming from a neighboring partner, neighboring country, whatever? So I would not excuse myself or you by saying this is anti-Semitism. And I doubt whether Europe can stand up to any moral value any longer with its performance regarding Israel the last 2 years and the EU positions. This is something for Europe to reflect on. Definitely we have to reflect about it as well. If we are partners, why do you treat us this way? And why solidarity is so short? I've been following the European reaction the last 2 years. First, it's proportionality. Then it's international law. Then it's humanitarian aid. How would anyone here face such a threat? I'm not talking about a foreign war in Africa or elsewhere. And then there is a quick fix. We recognize a Palestinian state. Good for you. Enjoy.
On that note, Yosef Amrani, thank you very much for coming to sit with us at Euractiv and talk to us.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.